Hey everyone, hi Maria. Thanks for joining us again today. So today we are talking about goals. For those of you who did not see the earlier videos, we're doing a five-part series on how to craft an MBA application in record time. So I am writing a fictitious application with Maria's help just in 2 weeks. So the goal is to have an application that is submit ready by the first few days in January. So in our first video, we talked about strategy, we talked about school selection, which we touched a little bit on goals, we touched a little bit on pretty much everything. On yesterday's video, we took a deep dive in resume. We talked about some of the hits and misses that people make in their resumes. And then Maria spent about 45 minutes to trash my own resume, which is really funny. I was just telling BB the other day that like even after 10 years of doing this and like getting jobs out of this resume, Maria can still kick my butt with her resume advice. So that was great. So today we want to talk about goals, but before going there, Maria, just wanted to quickly check with you, why are goals important, and how do goals play a part in like MBA application? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So pretty much every school at some point is going to want to know, why are you even pursuing this degree to begin with? Some schools have entire huge essays on it. Some schools only give you 500 characters to describe it. But every school at some level is going to want to know, like, why are you even doing this? Like, what's the point? Why are you going after this? And their motivations for doing this are both altruistic, but
Yeah.
also they're trying to cover their own behinds. So some of it is that, first of all, the MBA degree is very expensive. Scholarships are not nearly as plentiful as they were for undergraduates. So a lot of people, I think, apply to the MBA program assuming, like, well, yeah, the sticker price is $180,000, $200,000, but surely I will get a scholarship to cover all of it. Yes, scholarships are available, but they are not nearly as common as they were in the past. So if you are coming into this process, you need to be prepared to take out $180,000 at least in loans, at least if you're going to a typical 2-year top US
Right.
MBA program. And so they want to make sure that if you are going to give up 2 years of your life and almost 200,000 US dollars, which I think is like a crore and a half. It's been a long
Oh
time
yeah.
since I've
No,
done,
you're totally right.
it's been a while since I've had to convert things into rupees. But it's a lot of money. And so they want to make sure that, like, hey, have you actually thought this through? You're giving up 2 years of salary, 2 years of your life, and a lot of money. So have you actually thought about this? So on the one side of it, there is a real altruism there, right? Do you actually need this degree to get to where you want to go? Could we, sometimes when I work with people and I actually talk them out of the MBA, they're like, oh, well, I'm kind of sad now. And I'm like, I just saved you $200,000. Like,
Right.
come on. So there's that side of it. But then there's also the more they're covering their own butts side of it, which is they want to make sure that when you graduate that you have really great things to say about business school, especially their school, and that you don't go on message boards and say, well, I went to this school and their career services team was terrible and they couldn't get me any jobs, and oh, that was just terrible. Right. Because also, I think another big difference, especially if, I know GMAT Club, there are a lot of folks in India watching. I think in the undergraduate level, the university plays a more active role in helping you get a job in India. Whereas in the US, like, yeah, they have a career services office. They bring the employers to campus and they might give them a conference room where that's what they do, but they're not helping you get a job. All
Yeah.
they care about is that some of their students get jobs at different companies, but they don't care about you specifically. And they're not going to be like, well, I found 4 jobs for you this week. That's not how it works. So they want to make sure that when you graduate, you're not like, oh my gosh, the whole reason I did this whole 2-year thing and I did the 2 is because I was going to get a job in private equity. And now you're telling me that I can't get a job in private. Well, it's your fault, school, right? And so that's what they want to avoid. Because there are some people who go on the message board sometimes to get really grumpy, or there are like videos of like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done this degree. So those are the 2 reasons why the schools want to make sure that your career goals are achievable, right?
Right.
If you have been a professional ballerina for 7 years and you apply to business school and you say, I want to become a hedge fund manager when I graduate, it's probably not going to happen, at least not through a 2-year MBA program. I'm not saying that ballerinas can't become hedge fund managers, but it's probably a slightly different and longer path than that. So the schools want to make sure that, when you're applying, what does that mean for you as an applicant? It means that you need to make sure as an applicant that your career goal is realistic on some level, that it's something you can actually achieve. You also want to demonstrate flexibility. So if you say something like, I'm going to be an associate director of marketing in the consumer packaged goods division of Disney, wow, that's a really specific job. And if you don't get that one job, are you going to be grumpy? So
Yeah.
I think also demonstrating a flexibility. So what I advise people to do in Applicant Lab, and in Applicant Lab, I've got little exercises to help you think through this, is what's that long-term goal? What's that sort of big long-term impact you want to make in the world? And what are maybe 2 different ways you could achieve that goal? So
Right.
just to sort of segue to your career goal, you had a career that was both technology and education focused. And so your long-term goal is ed tech. And there are a couple of different ways you could pursue that goal. You could do it by going to big tech first and then working your way, making sort of a move from big tech into ed tech. Or you could have gone maybe to an ed tech company and
Yeah.
tried to work your way up that way. You could have gone to maybe the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where you were helping fund ed tech companies and choose
Right.
ed tech companies to fund. And then based on that, so there are lots of different ways to get there. So I want you, the viewers, to think about what's a realistic career goal for me, and what are a couple of different paths that I can flexibly take in order to reach the long-term impact that I want to make. And
Yeah.
while the short-term goal has to be realistic, the long-term impact doesn't have to be like, I'm going to save the world, but it does have to have something that kind of gets them excited, because they want to picture you on the front page of EdTech Weekly magazine 20 years from now, making the
Right.
school proud.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. I think the framework that I used and that I have for you to check today is I want to start off with my long term goal, right? Like that's the impact that I want to make, and I think I have some leeway to be a little bit vague in my long term goal, but for short term goal I want to be like super specific, right? So and then try to understand like, okay, so I can't do my long term goal today, otherwise I have no reason to apply to an MBA program. So then, okay, so what all do I need to get to my long term goal? So but in order to understand the gaps, I also want to talk about, what are some of the things that I have done to advance to my long-term goals. I call that foundation, right? So like, what's my foundation? Like, what have I done that makes me kind of like uniquely positioned to get to my long-term goal? So I guess the question that I was trying to answer was like, okay, so your long-term goal solves a big problem. I think if your long-term goal does not solve a big problem, then like, what's the point? But I think also, of all the problems in the world, right? Like there are a ton of problems in the world. Why is this worth my time, right? Like, why am I invested in this? So I think the foundation helps in like, giving context to why this is my goal. And then from there, like foundation gives me where I am today. It just gives me like a status quo, current state type of a thing. What all do I need to get there? And ideally, the gaps need to be aligned with A, an MBA program, and then B, the short term goal that I have. So these two are the ways I would get to my long term goal. And then finally, my short term goal as to like what I want to do straight after business school and why that would help me get there. Does that make sense as a structure?
That makes perfect sense.
Awesome. So I think what I want to do for the rest of the time is show you some of the document that I've made, and we can do it like we did yesterday, where I share my screen and you give me feedback as we read through them. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
All right. So I'm sharing my screen. I'm always scared when I share my screen on like live video. Like, okay, would I share like something else by mistake? And will people see all the crap that's on my desktop? My
Uh-huh.
desktop is very disorganized. Okay, can you read well? Do you want me to zoom in?
Yes, no, I can see this perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, so I started off with the hook because I learned from you that I think a hook is optional, but for me it's not really optional because I want people to be excited to read an essay, right? So for hook, my general pitch is always to start with some sort of statistic that kind of blows people's mind. And I mean, and the statistic doesn't need to be like super unique or anything, but it gives a very quick snapshot into the problem that I'm trying to solve without me having to tell them all sorts of background context to explain the problem. So I'll stop talking. Why don't you read for a couple minutes on the hook stuff, and then we'll get there.
Okay, I think I've got the general idea. So yeah, great. I actually, well, as you know, I think everyone needs a hook. I don't think the hook has to be a statistic necessarily, but I think you do have to explain like, why do I care about this problem, as you said?
Right.
Because, and why does passion even matter? Because at the end of the day, life is long and jobs are difficult. And so if you don't have a real passion, if I didn't have a passion for democratizing MBA admissions, I would have given up on Applicant Lab probably 9 years ago. Right. And I would have gone to get a job at Netflix or something. You know what I mean? I would have gone back to entertainment and never done this again. So you have to have the reason why passion matters is because you have to have a real passion that's going to get you through those difficult times when everything is sort of falling apart and you're like, why am I even doing this? So demonstrating a real passion, ideally there's some sort of a personal story where you can talk about like, hey, when I was growing up, my dad was an entrepreneur and he lost his business because he couldn't get funding. And that's why now I want to start a fintech company that helps entrepreneurs get funding, or whatever it is. And if you don't have some sort of an emotional story around it, no problem. But in that case, giving me as a reader some reason to be excited for you to achieve your goal is really important. And so in this case, you're using statistics to do it. I think, just to be nitpicky for a split second, because India has such a large population, if you were talking about a smaller company like El Salvador, then I think the percentages would be good to use. But I think in this case, you could say something like, of the I don't know, 100 million people who graduate from high school each year in India, only whatever 10% make it to college graduation. Like, then I was like, oh my gosh, the scope of the problem, that number is going to be so huge. But so yeah, and the reason I really advocate a hook is because, again, it's going to make me as a reader root for you, and you want me as a reader to be rooting for you because you need to win over several readers as part of this process. And then at some point there's going to be a reader who's going to probably go into committee where they are rooting for you, and then the other readers have the people that they're rooting for, and then you all get together in a room and you argue over, okay, we can let in maybe 5 edtech people this year. Who are our 5 going to be? And you want me as your reader to be like, it's got to be Shovik, because you don't even understand. Like, there's 100 million people who don't even, so that's why I really advocate. I think a hook is necessary always. Career vision statements that start off with, I aspire to become a marketing manager at a consumer package. It's like just so boring. And I don't know if you have any real passion for it, or you're just doing it for the money, especially if you want to go after something that is a very lucrative field like banking. Like, okay, are you only doing this for the money? I'd like to see something a little bit deeper.
I think my other pet peeve is, when people write like, I want to be the CEO or the CFO of this company. And I think for short-term goals, having a title fixation is totally fine. But I think for long-term goal, I have a hard time understanding, like, why does this title even matter? I think sure, it can be there if you're trying to talk about increasing the scope of your impact. But other than that, I think titles kind of put me off when it comes to long-term goals.
Absolutely. That's why the long-term goal should be more focused on the impact you want to make on the world, and not the very specific, I'm going to be an executive vice president of interactive marketing at Hulu or what. Like, okay, like that. Oh, that's a little specific, man. What if that doesn't work out? And honestly, admissions officers are people too. That's something I repeat often. And life never goes the way you think it's going to go. Like, I think any of us 10, 15 years ago, if you were to say, oh, Maria, 15 years, you're going to be on a webinar at 7 o'clock in the morning, or whatever time, at 8 o'clock in the morning, telling people about MBA admissions, I'd be like, yeah, you need to put the drugs away, because what are you talking about? I'd be an entrepreneur. Me, an entrepreneur? Never. Right. So it's just, life takes these twists and turns. And so you're never, I can't imagine that anyone who does put a specific title, unless it's like a family business where you're guaranteed the title, or, if your company let's say you work for a large oil and gas company that is sponsoring your MBA, and they have said, when you come back, this will be your title. Okay, fine. But for the most part, it makes you look silly, right? It kind of makes you look immature, because the fact is life takes twists and turns that you cannot possibly anticipate. So I think having a guiding North Star in terms of here's roughly where I want to be in the world and here's roughly the kind of impact I want to be making is great. So that's why I like your thing of like, I want to create my own company to improve learning outcomes, to do, to do these things that is going to help students get to college. I think that's great. You might even want to be a little bit more specific in terms of like improving learning outcomes. Could be a lot of different things.
Sure.
So maybe you want to focus on just mathematics achievement, or literacy, or financial literacy, right? How many people graduate from college, but then they can't, that's a different problem altogether. But some people graduate from college and they don't know how to balance a checkbook, or, not that people have checkbooks anymore, but they don't know how to manage their credit or what have you, or their spending. So, I would be a little bit more specific there.
I can't believe that there used to be a time when people balance their checkbooks like that.
My husband still does it. It's weird.
Okay, so it seems
here
like
right now.
you saw the long-term goal. Any other thoughts on the long-term goal?
I think the one thing I would say, combining the long-term goal and the hook, is, and you start to get into this in the next paragraph, is so like, why Shovik? Okay, you've convinced me this is a really big problem. Wow, but why isn't someone else in a better, why not somebody else? And so why is this something that matters to you? So I think I would start your hook with an actual story of a student that I think that would really help take. Right. I would combine the staggering, mind-blowing statistic with also one very micro story of that one student that broke your heart, or that one student that like changed your mind about all sorts of stuff. So that I think would also help personalize it a little bit, because as we said in the last video, a lot of people from Teach for India, Teach for America, what have you, a lot of people from the same buckets apply every year. So pretty much anyone from Teach for India could apply with that same statistic as their hook. Sure. But only Shovik is the one who worked with that one kid in the Mumbai slums who taught himself calculus and inspired you to do whatever. So I think that's the one thing I would say about the, that origin story for the long-term goal is the one thing I would change. And then moving on to this next paragraph of foundation, this is really important. This is where you're proving to me as a reader that you actually know what you're talking about. And why does that matter? It matters because if I, as a career services office, if I manage to bring an ed tech company on campus to do recruiting, and we put you in front of them for an interview, and they say to you, well, okay, what do you know about teaching? And you're like, well, nothing.
Right.
Everyone's going to be embarrassed. So this is where you establish your bona fides. You establish your credibility that, okay, I actually have credibility in this. I don't have so much credibility that I don't need the MBA, but I have a basic amount of credibility so that I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so for my foundation, I wanted to focus on my teaching experience, which was more grassroots, and then talk through some of the experience in leading school interventions that was kind of more at scale. So my experience is not just like, my data point is not like n equals 1, right? So I have a slightly broader scope. And then I talk also about, my current job, where I've been able to build and deploy super technical products across millions of customers. So those three, I think, make for a nice overall, like I know what I'm talking about, right? So I'm not like, just shooting in the dark. But do you think I'm missing anything here?
No, because I think the other thing I like about this is that you are talking about technology specifically. So that ties in to the ed tech. You're not just saying, well, I spent a lot of time with students, so I know what students need, but you're focusing on, I spent a lot of time with students, and specifically I was implementing technology and I was watching them interact with the technology. And then I was convincing school leaders to implement new technologies. Because as an ed tech founder, if you are targeting schools as your clients, you're gonna need to win over the school leaders, because if nobody uses it, it doesn't matter. So I think it's pretty good.
Okay, so then the last part of that is the gap and the short-term goal. So I think I had a little bit of difficulty to come up with the gaps. I'm curious to know what you think. Post MBA, I'm trying to look at more suite of products than just one app. So I think about something like a Google Classroom or an Apple Classroom that tries to do like as a school leader, you tell Apple that hey, like you are my everything. So you will be my learning management system. Teachers will track and grade homework through you, so like everything that's possible. The problem with Google and Apple Classroom is that while they're nice, they're good substitutes. They don't really offer something that's like truly unique. Like it still is like just learning on the iPad. So I don't think it offers something that's like revolutionary. So I think there are ways to disrupt that space. But why I think Google and Apple Classroom is still a good first step for me is it sort of forces me to think about the overall school technological ecosystem and not just like one specific learning product. And the other part of working with Google and Apple Classroom is that you get to work and lobby like these school districts where you have this negotiation, where you have this, because these things are not like, I mean, they're cheaper than other Google or Apple products, but they're also like expensive for a school to buy for like thousands of students, right? So you get to build these relationships with these school districts that I think will be super helpful for when I start my own.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to approach it. I mean, honestly, it's simply a matter of thinking about almost picturing yourself like 15 years from now being an entrepreneur. Okay, you've built this product, it's really cool, it does a great job of teaching math. Now what? Well, I need to raise funding for it. I need to convince people to quit their cushy corporate jobs and take a leap of faith to work for me. I need to convince school districts, like we were just saying, to actually buy my product. And so I think when you think about like, gosh, why can't I do this now? Or if I were to do this now, where are the places where I am most likely to fail? That's where your YMBA comes in, because
Right.
that's when you say like, and you have it in the paragraph above, uh, a little bit where you say I need to think big, so I need a more strategic overview.
Yeah.
I don't know that you really I mean, if since you're applying as someone who already is a product managers tend to have a fairly strategic overview, but you might not know as a product manager how to run the finances of a business. You might not know how to market a product, because once you hand
Right.
over the product to marketing and sales, they kind of take off with it, I would think.
Yeah,
So
sorry, maybe I wasn't clear for this. So, as a product manager, I think one of the problem that I face is like I'm a part of a really tiny, tiny product that is a part of like a giant, right? So, and I think that kind of makes me, so as a product manager, I learn how to like create specs, like rally engineers, get buy-in from people, resolve conflict, etc. But I still do that for in a narrow scope. You know what I mean? So as opposed to like working on product strategy, I would be far removed from, well, not far removed, but I'd be somewhat removed from like the nitty gritties and the engineering. But I would probably have a bigger impact on thinking big on where the suite of product or where this big thing needs to go next and defining that vision instead.
okay.
Does that make sense? I
I
don't think
see.
I was super clear on my answer.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I see what you're saying, and I just think it would have to be described a little bit more clearly, because in the part that's kind of cut off at the top, you say I've designed, built, and scaled products to 100 million customers. So
Right.
since products is sort of plural, it seems to me like you already know how to design plural products,
Yeah.
multiple products. So when you say, well, I need to know an entire suite of products, I'm like, well, you're kind of sounds like you're doing that now. So I think that the reasoning is fine, but just make sure that when you're explaining it, you can say, I have gotten really, really good at this one little speck of the cloud computing world,
Yeah.
but educational systems, they need an end-to-end solution that covers, everything from grade books to virtual attendance to teaching kids how to sing or whatever it is. So maybe that could just be explained a little bit more clearly. But I would argue that that's the bigger YMBA for you. I don't have a doubt that if you went from managing one product to managing three to managing seven, I don't think you need an MBA for that. I think that's just experience.
Yeah.
But I do think that if I were to say, okay, so Shovik, what's your sales material? What are your sales materials going to look like? Are you going to have a direct to school sales team? Are you going to have an in-house sales team? Are you going to outsource sales? That sort of thing you might not have any experience with.
No, I
So
do not.
it's not about, for the YMBA, it's not about it's kind of like with the resume. The resume doesn't have every single thing you've ever done. The YMBA is not literally every single reason you can think of what you would gain at the MBA. I would urge you to focus on what those biggest gaps are, like something like, let's say, corporate, like financial management or raising funds, for instance.
Yeah.
So because we don't have, most schools do not give us unlimited words, so you would have to be really specific about really cherry picking the ones that would have the most impact.
Yeah, I think the sales one is super interesting. So, and I think a lot of like tech CEOs who, started off with a very consumer centric product and then moved to like a B2B type of a thing. Like Amazon's a good example, Google's uh, a good example. And if you, and in like many interviews, they often talk about like, the challenges of doing anything that is B2B. And you need like a big sales team. Like you just cannot go around not having a sales team. Like you cannot innovate your way out of a sales team, right? You just have to have one. I know Andy Jassy talks about this a lot, and I know Google hired someone from Oracle to lead Google Cloud to do exactly that. So I think that's totally a gap that I think I should call out more prominently. The other one that I wanted to call out was, building a network with institutional investors and like raising capital, injecting capital at the right time, and not just raising capital for the sake of raising capital, but raising capital with intent and purpose.
Yeah, the investment piece of it is really important, because I think before I went to business school, I just sort of assumed, if I never thought about becoming an entrepreneur, but when I would read articles, I would just sort of assume like, wow, this person raised $10 million, they must be super successful. But in fact, the more money you raise, the more of your company you give away and the less control you have over your company. And in fact, it might not be best to raise $10 million. You might want to raise 1 million, but keep more control and grow more slowly. So anyway, those sorts of considerations are something you don't think about until you go to business school. So I think that that's the other big gap that I would
Or
think
you watch
that,
Shark Tank, which I watch obsessively.
you just watched Shark Tank. That we just saved everyone $200,000. Thank you. Please send your thank you notes to me, Maria.
Cool. I think that's awesome. That's kind of like, okay, so I think my job now is to talk through some of the gaps that are, more prominent, like talk about like, things that I don't currently do in my job. What do you think of the post-MBA roles in like Apple, Google Classroom? I know we talked about startups, but I really feel like if I could get a job, if I wanted a job as like a product, whatever, in a startup, I'd be able to get that job today.
So I think a couple of things. I think it's good that you mentioned two potential companies, Google or Apple. It does show that sort of flexibility in your goals. But even then, those two groups are relatively small.
Very, very similar too. Yeah.
And they're very similar. So the thing about startups is that now, with a lot of these schools offering with the STEM certification and the 3-year OPT, it has become maybe not advisable, but it has become more possible for people who are not American, who do not have green cards or whatever, to be able to work for a startup for a year or two. So, I think that yes, you would get that great experience, but also you would be a small fish in a very big pond.
Right.
So I think there's something to be said for, in fact, I could argue like, well, you already have the big tech best practices experience from your current employer. So why not jump into something a little, maybe not a startup, but maybe like a mid-sized company where you could wear more hats, you could have more responsibility.
Yeah.
You could get more of that hands-on experience. So maybe you just sort of explain both as potential routes that take you up to the
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's also like, I was thinking about startups too, and I was trying to like research like which are the startups that are closest to like school districts. Like I don't really care about a startup that students that kids do on their own, right? So like something like a Udemy just does not work for me. But something like a Khan Academy, which is trying to get into school curriculum, that totally is super useful and very much aligned with my long-term goals. Cool, that makes sense. I think we are kind of out of time. It's 8:30 right now, and I want to be at time today. But I just want to underline the next step. So next week, we're going to take these goals and start writing essays. So I will put some, by the way, all of this stuff is in the same Google Doc, and folks watching can access it at any time. I think my next step is to write a couple of essays before we meet again, and then go through the same exercise. I think that video will probably need to be a little bit longer, just because essays tend to go a little bit longer. So maybe we can talk to some of the scheduling there. But I think what I'm planning to do is, one essay on like mostly career stuff, one essay on like, like leadership examples, or essays that ask for like failure, learning, and things like that. And one like totally unconventional essay. Like, I don't think Berkeley does that anymore, but Bahas used to have a, what song best describes you essay, which always used to bother me.
Yeah, Columbia stole that essay now.
Right.
So Haas doesn't have it anymore, but Columbia has it now. But yeah,
Right.
so I mean, if anything, we could skip I feel like you've got a pretty good foundation right here. Maybe we could very quickly do the career vision one, because you've kind of already done most of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, leadership for sure. A good leadership story can be Swiss Army knifed around to answer like 7 different prompts.
Yeah.
So great. Sounds like a plan.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Maria, for joining, and thanks everyone for joining. Join us again next Monday, I think, but we might be rescheduling a little bit just because we are around the holidays, and we want everyone in the video and people who are watching to just unplug from their computers for a little bit. All right. Thanks, Maria. I'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.